Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tales, where secrets slip, lies unravel, and the truth always has a twist. Real stories, raw confessions, and shocking betrayals. Drop a comment if you've ever caught a red flag too late now. Let's get into today's tale right. Before my sister's wedding, my parents suddenly pointed at me and announced, "She's just here out of pity." Everyone turned to look. My aunt whispered, "We all know you'll never get married." 5 days later, I got an invitation that changed everything. I, 42 female, was at my younger sister Cecily's 39 female second wedding rehearsal dinner when everything I'd always suspected about my family's opinion of me was said out loud to my face in public. We were at a vineyard in Virginia, picturesque, expensive, and painfully curated, down to the napkin rings, is showed up alone. That wasn't new. I've been single for most of my adult life, not because I hate relationships, but because I never felt the need to rush into one just to check a box. I have a quiet job, I love working as a museum curator, and a tiny but cozy home filled with art and silence. It's not a glamorous life, but it's honest. My family, though, they never really accepted that I've always been the other daughter. The one who didn't marry young, didn't have kids, didn't take pictures with matching pajamas at Christmas. I was never told directly that I was a disappointment, but it was in the way. They talked about Cecily's milestones like they were the only ones that mattered. I was tolerated, not celebrated, and then at dinner, my mom stood to make a toast. She was glowing. She always glows when it comes to Sophie. After a minute or two of praising my sister's beauty, resilience, and incredible taste in men, she turned toward me only slightly, not fully, and chuckled. "She's just here out of pity," she said loudly, casually, like it was a joke that wouldn't hurt. Everyone turned, everyone looked. I could feel the air disappear from the room, the tension of secondhand embarrassment curling into silence. And then, as if that wasn't enough, my Aunt Perina leaned over and muttered the cruelest thing I've ever had whispered. "Tome, we all know you'll never get married." No one corrected her. No one said, "That's out of line." Or even, "Come on, don't be rude," not my dad, not Sophie, not even the cousins I grew up babysitting. I sat through the rest of the evening with a glass of wine in my hand and my dignity peeling off me in strips. I don't even remember how dessert tasted. I only remember feeling small and hollow. I went home that night and didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the ceiling, replaying the scene again and again. And the worst part wasn't the insult. It was the fact that no one thought it was worth defending. Me that told me everything I ever needed to know about how they saw me as a spare someone who wouldn't amount to anything outside of family gatherings and polite silence. And then 5 days later, life changed. An email from a contact I'd forgotten. I'd even submitted to an international invitation to speak at a major art fair in Sao Paulo. My proposal on Appalachian textile work had been selected. Not just approved, they wanted me to open the panel. It felt surreal, like the universe had been waiting for just the right moment to send a lifeline. And I grabbed it with both hands, but I wasn't going to run from that wedding. Oh no, I had something to say before I flew off to Brazil. I arrived at the wedding in a long velvet dress, midnight blue, and heels I rarely wear. I did my hair. I put on makeup. I looked like someone who belonged in the room, not because of the way I dressed, but because I'd finally understood that I didn't need their approval to have value. I walked in alone, as always. But this time, I didn't feel alone. I felt powerful. My parents saw me and said nothing. My mother looked me up and down and made a vague comment about how nice I looked. Sophie said, "Hi," more out of obligation than warmth. That's fine, I wasn't there for them anymore. The ceremony was long and lovely. Sophie cried when James said his vows. People laughed and dabbed at their eyes. I clapped, posed for pictures, and kept my secret tucked close to my chest. It was at the reception after the cake was cut, and people started giving toasts that I stood up. I didn't plan to, but something in me said, "This is the moment." I lifted my glass. "I just want to say, congratulations to Cecily and James," I began. My voice didn't shake. "You both look incredible, and I truly hope this marriage brings everything you're hoping for." People smiled, nodded. "I also want to share a bit of news," I said. "I've been invited to speak internationally at the Sao Paulo Contemporary Art Fair. Next month, I'll be curating and leading a panel on cultural restoration through Appalachian textile art pause. And I just want to thank you all because Being underestimated for so many years gave me the space to focus on my work to grow without noise and to build something I'm truly proud of. So really thank you. And I sat down. No dramatic exits. No mic drops. Just quiet. Elegant revenge. There was a hush. Then polite applause, then real applause from people who didn't even know me but felt what I meant. My mother didn't look at me for. The rest of the night, my father said, nothing. Sophie was too wrapped in her own spotlight to react, but it didn't matter. For once, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen not by them, but by myself. The applause eventually faded, swallowed back into the rhythm of clinking glasses and low conversation. But the energy had shifted, I could feel it. There was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before, like someone had cracked a window in a stuffy room and let something real in. Noon said anything directly to me right away. They didn't know how to. My cousin he called me by with 2 flutes of champagne. She's the only one in the family. Whoever asks about my work without sounding like she's reading from a teleprompter. She sat down beside me, nudged a glass toward my hand. That was badass, she whispered. I smiled. Thanks. You know, she said, I don't think anyone realized how much you've actually done. I know, I replied. They never asked. I watched my parents across the room. My mother was talking too. James's mother, her expression fixed in that southern, perfect smile she wore when she needed to recover from something unsavory. My father just stared into his glass, quiet and unreadable. He rarely spoke much in public, but when he did, it was always to support whatever narrative my mother was pushing. That night, he was silent. What surprised me most was how calm I felt. I thought I'd be shaking or flushed, or that I'd need to go hide in the bathroom to breathe. But I wasn't. I was steady. I was grounded. I realized this wasn't revenge. Not really. It wasn't even about proving them wrong. It was about being right about myself all along. Later in the evening, Sophie found me alone. She was holding the edge of her dress off the grass and trying to balance her heels on the uneven vineyard ground. Her smile was tight. Congratulations, Marion, she said, on the thing, the talk. Thanks, I said. I didn't elaborate. She shifted. You didn't tell anyone, didn't think it would interest anyone. Sophie paused. Her expression twitched like she wasn't sure whether to keep playing the bride or level with me. Well, you looked good up. There, she said, finally confident. I nodded. That's because I was. And I left it at that. She didn't apologize. She didn't bring up what Momer Aunt Gloria said at the rehearsal dinner. I think in her world, those things aren't cruel. They're just truths that don't require confrontation. That was the part that hurt more than anything. Not the actual words, but the normally of them. The way they rolled so casually off the tongue as if they were simply facts, no one questioned. But I didn't need an apology because I was leaving in 4 days. The days after the wedding were quiet. No phone calls, no messages. My parents didn't even thank me for attending. Not that I expected them to. I think they were still trying to process that I hadn't curled up and disappeared like I usually did. Instead, I was packing, checking visa details, practicing my talk in front of the mirror. I got one message and email from James's younger sister, Ava. We'd only spoken briefly at the wedding. She was in publishing and had an interest in regional art. Her message read, just wanted to say I loved your speech. If you ever consider turning that panel into a book, let me know. I'd love to help get it seen. I saved that email. The day before my flight, I walked to my favorite cafe, the kind where the staff knows your order and no one asks why. You're alone. I sat outside, wrapped in my coat, watching people go by, sipping tea, not wine, not champagne, just something warm and grounding. I thought about the years I spent trying to win a kind of affection that was never meant for me. About the dinner tables filled with praise I cooked but never received. About birthdays where I lit my own candles because no one remembered, and yet I didn't feel bitter. I felt relieved. It was like I had stepped off a treadmill. I hadn't realized I was running on chasing something that never belonged to me in the first place. The flight to Sao Paulo was long but peaceful. I slept more than I expected, to waking up somewhere over the Caribbeanto, the faint blue glow of the cabin and the hum of an engine that reminded me of rainy nights back home. I didn't feel nervous, not the way I used to before, anything important. This wasn't like the school recital or job interviews where I felt like I had something to prove. This was different. I had already proven something to myself. Everything now was just movement forward. I arrived at the hotel in the Via Maddalena neighborhood, just before noon, the room overlooked. A steep street lined, with murals and the smell of street food, drifted in when I cracked the window. I took it all in the colors, the motion, the voices of people living outside of Mismal world of family expectations and polite suppression. The art fair was housed in a sprawling, modern venue, whitewashed walls and angular corners, all clean lines and soft light Butenside was color texture soul. My exhibit was set up in a shared gallery space next to a Kenyan sculptor's work and a French installation piece made entirely of recycled plastic. It felt surreal, like I'd finally been allowed to speak in a room full of people who actually wanted to listen. The panel was scheduled for the second afternoon. My palms sweat a little as I adjusted the microphone. But when I looked out over the crowd, maybe 100 people, maybe more, I saw interest, no pity, not confusion, and when I spoke, I wasn't the older sister who never settled down. I wasn't the daughter seated at the edge of every photo. I was Elena Delgado, curator speakers, Tori Teller. I talked about regional art from the Blue Ridge Mountains, the intersection of generational silence and visual tradition, and how textiles had been used by women like my grandmother, not just for utility, but for expression. I explained how beauty had survived through cloth when it was denied through words. When I finished, there was a pause, then questions, actual questions, not small talk, not condescension dialogue. Afterwards, a woman named Isabel approached me, late 50s, thoughtful eyes. She introduced herself as a gallery owner. Based in Lisbon, I see so much of my mother's home in your work, she said. Portugal has similar ghosts. Have you ever considered bringing the exhibit to Europe? We exchanged cards. We hugged. It wasn't business. It was a connection. That evening, I walked the streets alone and didn't feel lonely. I wandered into a bookstore and bought a Portuguese novel. I couldn't read just because the cover made me feel something. I watched a couple argue in rapid lyrical bursts and laughed at the way they seemed to find joy. Even in frustration, I drank wine with strangers who became friends in the span of an hour. For the first time in years, I didn't wonder what my family would think of me. I didn't need them to think about anything I was building, something they didn't even know how to see. When I returned to Virginia, the winter air hit me like a cold truth. Everything looked the same, familiar. Roads, gray skies, bare trees, the quiet hum of small-town life pulsing at the same rhythm it always had. But I wasn't the same. I unpacked. Slowly, I set the Portuguese novel on my coffee table, even though I still couldn't read a word of it. I framed one of the gallery flyers and hung it in my kitchen. Not as proof, as a reminder that sometimes the world opens up after the door you've been knocking on your whole life refuses to budge. 2 days later, I received a letter, not an email. Not a text, an actual letter in a cream-colored envelope, with my name written in my mother's precise slanted handwriting. My first instinct was to toss it aside, but something made me sit down at my kitchen table and open it, with care. Elena, I saw your name in the New York Times. I don't know what to say, except that I didn't know you were doing things like that. I didn't know you were capable of something that important. That's not meant to sound harsh. It's meant to be honest. I guess we never really paid attention. I'm sorry. I hope you'll call Love Mom. There were no tales. No mention of what she said at the rehearsal dinner. No acknowledgement of Gloria's comment or the years I'd spent as an afterthought, just surprise and a vague apology, like someone realizing the painting they'd kept in the basement was worth something. After all, I folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer where I kept old postcards and spare stamps. I didn't throw it out, but I didn't call either. Not yet. Instead, I poured my energy into the exhibit proposal for Lisbon. Isabel had emailed 2 days earlier with a date suggestion for spring. She said she had a space in a quiet, historic part of Thessaly, a converted monastery with vatted ceilings and thick stone walls. It would suit your work, she wrote. Quiet stories belong in solid places. I liked that. Meanwhile, Cecil's marriage began to show cracks faster than anyone expected. A friend from back home mentioned seeing James at a bar with a woman who was definitely not Sophie Gossip, maybe, but it sounded familiar. I didn't dig into it. I didn't need to. I had nothing to prove and nothing to gain. But what struck me most in the weeks after the wedding was Thessalon's. No follow-up calls from my father. No casual texts from Sophie No Sudden. Flood of interest in my life. The letter from my mother stood alone like an island of confusion between oceans of indifference. I started walking more every morning before work. I'd bundle up and wander the back roads near my house, letting my breath fog in front of me while I listened to the same playlist of folk jazz and Appalachian folk. It grounded me, reminded me that life happens slowly, not in big scenes or monologues, but in the space between them. And then something happened that I didn't expect. Hi, the cousin who brought me champagne at the wedding called. She wanted to meet for coffee, said she had something she wanted to ask me in person. When we met, she looked different, tired, a little pale. She told me she was thinking of leaving her husband, that she felt like no one in the family would support her decision, that they already whispered behind her back anytime she disagreed with tradition. I saw what they did to you, she said, and I kept quiet. I'm sorry I didn't offer advice. I didn't need to. We just sat together for a while in a booth near the window as the snow began to fall outside. Sometimes the real shift isn't when you speak loudly, but when someone else finally listens in the silence. Winter passed slowly, but for once, I didn't dread the stillness I used to hate how quiet it got in February. The bare trees, the frozen sidewalks, the days that ended before dinner. I used to feel like time stopped with the cold, like everyone was somewhere else living lives I wasn't invited to be part of. This year, it felt different. I wasn't waiting anymore. Instead, I was building. The Lisbon exhibit took shape. I worked late digging through archives and old regional quilts, writing stories. To accompany each piece, stories of women like my grandmother, poor, rural, overlooked, who had stitched love and defiance into fabric when they had no other voice. The more I worked them, or I realized this wasn't just about art, it was about legacy. It was about reclamation. My world, once so tightly wound around what my family thought of me, had stretched far beyond their grasp. Then in early April, I received another letter. This one was from my father. Marion, your mother told me she wrote to you. I didn't know what she said, but you want to say I'm proud of you. I didn't say it when you were younger, and I should have. We got used to thinking Sophie was the one who would carry the family name, the pictures, the legacy. I'd think we were too narrow in our view. You built something with your own name, with nothing handed to you. That means more than I ever let on. I hope we can talk, Dad. It was a better letter. Simpler, more direct. I didn't cry, but I felt something. Shift. I didn't reply right away. I sat with it, let it breathe. A week later, I received an invitation, not to another wedding, to speak at a university, my alma mater. They wanted me to guest lecture for an interdisciplinary arts seminar, the same university where 20 years ago my mother had said, just get the degree, don't waste too much time on the art stuff. I accepted. The morning of the talk, I wore the same navy velvet dress from Cezal's wedding, not out of spite, but because it made me feel powerful, grounded, like I had earned every thread of it. After the lecture, a student came up to me, maybe 22, with paint on her knuckles and the kind of wood-eyed fire I used to have before I learned to hide it. She said, I didn't think people like us could end up in places like that. She meant galleries, international platforms, recognition. I smiled. We can just not always through the front door. That night, I went home and opened my drawer of letters. I took out my father's. I didn't write back, but I did call. We didn't talk about the past. Not really. He told me about his arthritis. I told him about Lisbon. I didn't mention the wedding or the things my mother said. But his voice cracked. Just once when he asked if I was happy. I said yes, and I meant it. Sophie called 2 weeks later, not to apologize. She never did, but she mentioned casually that she and James were taking time apart and that she was rethinking a few things. She sounded tired, less smug than usual, more human. She asked if I wanted to meet for coffee sometime. I said I'd think about it. I haven't decided yet. Not because I'm holding a grudge, but because I'm busy. I'm building a book proposal, preparing for Lisbon, getting ready to move my exhibit to another city. The world is big, and for so long I thought mine was as small as a dinner table where no one looked up when I spoke. But it turns out I was never the spare, I was the original. And while they were all busy rehearsing their roles in a family play, I stepped off stage, built my own theater, and filled the seats with people who saw me as I was fully formed, unapologetically whole. That is the best kind of revenge, not silence, not pettiness, but success that doesn't beg to be seen. It just stands there, quiet, undeniable, and glowing.